You have been waiting for a sign. Maybe you've been waiting for a long time. Maybe you've framed it differently. A confirmation, a signal, a moment of clarity that would tell you the thing you already know, but haven't let yourself act on. Maybe you've been looking at coincidences and wondering if they mean something. Maybe you've been watching for patterns in the ordinary fabric of your days, scanning the surface of your life for something that would arrive and say, "Now." This is the moment. This is the direction. This is the confirmation you needed. And something brought you here. Something moved through the sequence of your attention and landed you in front of this transmission at this exact moment in your life. And I want you to hold that for a second before we go any further. Not because it's magical in the way you might dismiss as wishful thinking, but because what brought you here is the very mechanism we're going to spend the next hour excavating from beneath the surface of everything you think you understand about signs, about signals, about the way the quantum field communicates with the consciousness that lives inside it. Here is what I want to tell you before we go one layer deeper. This is not a video about positive thinking. This is not a transmission about manifesting your desires or visualizing your dream life into existence. What we are going to do today is something far more precise, far more unsettling, and far more real than any of that surface level conversation. We are going to dig beneath the idea of a sign, beneath the comfortable spiritual notion that the universe sends you messages, and find what is actually happening at the quantum level when reality appears to be speaking directly to you. And then we are going to go one layer deeper than that, because beneath the quantum mechanics, there is something the ancient traditions mapped with extraordinary precision thousands of years before physics had the instruments to confirm it. And beneath that, there is a truth about you, about the nature of your awareness and its relationship to the field of all possibility, that changes everything about what a sign actually is, what it actually means, and why this particular warning carries a weight that no other sign you've been waiting for ever could. But first, let me dismantle the thing you think you know. You believe a sign is something that comes to you. You believe it originates outside of you, in the arrangement of the world, in the timing of events, in the appearance of something unexpected that seems to carry meaning. You've been taught to look for signs the way you look for mail. You wait, the world delivers, you receive, and if the delivery doesn't come in the form you expected, you keep waiting. You keep watching the surface of your life for something to arrive from outside it. This is the surface understanding of what a sign is, and it is the layer that conceals everything. Because quantum mechanics, not metaphor, not philosophy, not spiritual poetry, but the actual physics that describes the behavior of reality beneath the level of what your senses can detect. Quantum mechanics found something beneath the surface of matter that should have shattered this understanding completely. It found that what we call the external world and what we call the observer are not separate systems exchanging information across a gap. They are participatory. They are entangled. They are, at the deepest level of what can be measured, the same process looking at itself from two different angles. And that changes what a sign is not metaphorically. Structurally, at the level of what is actually happening when reality appears to be speaking to you. Let me show you the layer beneath the surface, and then let me show you the layer beneath that, and then let me show you why the warning in the title of this transmission is not dramatic language designed to get your attention. It is an accurate description of something the quantum field does, something that most people never understand, and something that, once you understand it, you will never be able to unsee. The veil is about to lift. Let's begin with what physics actually found beneath the surface of matter. Not the popular version, not the metaphor that gets passed around in conversations about consciousness and reality. The actual discovery, the one that the scientific establishment has been quietly struggling to integrate for nearly a century because its implications are too radical for the surface-level understanding of what reality is supposed to be. In the early 20th century, physicists began probing the behavior of particles at scales smaller than the atom. What they found there was not a smaller version of the solid, predictable, mechanical world they expected. What they found was something that defied every assumption about the nature of physical reality. They found that particles, the fundamental units of matter, do not have definite properties until they are observed. They exist in what physics calls a superposition, a state of simultaneous possibility where multiple outcomes coexist, not as a limitation of our measurement tools, but as an actual feature of the particle's existence. The particle is not in one place that we haven't found yet. It is genuinely in all its possible places at once, until something interacts with it, until observation occurs. And at the moment of observation, the wave of possibility collapses into a single, definite, measurable outcome. This is not a metaphor. This is what the mathematics describes. This is what the experiments confirm. This is what physicists have been measuring, replicating, and refining for decades. The act of observation, the act of a conscious system interacting with a quantum system, is what determines which possibility becomes real. Peel back that understanding and look at what's underneath. Because here is what this actually means, and here is where the surface version of quantum mechanics stops and the deeper layer begins. The popular interpretation of this discovery is that consciousness somehow magically creates reality, that you can think your desires into existence because the universe is made of thought. This is the surface appropriation of quantum mechanics, the layer that sounds profound but stops before it reaches the actual depth. The deeper layer is this. What quantum mechanics found is not that consciousness creates reality out of nothing. It found that reality, at its most fundamental level, is not a collection of fixed objects with predetermined properties. It is a field of probability, a field of potential, a field in which what becomes actual is determined by the interaction between the field and the system that is observing it. You are not separate from this field. You are not a consciousness that exists on one side of a gap, looking at a physical world that exists on the other side. You are a localized pattern within the field, a node of self-referential awareness that has emerged from the same quantum substrate as everything you see, touch, and experience. and the field you are embedded in is not passive. It is not a blank canvas waiting for your instructions. It is a dynamic, interconnected, responsive system in which your state, your frequency, your pattern of expectation, your habitual way of collapsing possibility into experience, is continuously participating in the determination of what becomes real. This is where the idea of a sign begins to transform. Because if you are not a receiver, waiting for messages from an external world, but a participant in a field that is continuously shaping itself around the pattern of your awareness, then a sign is not something that comes to you from outside. A sign is a moment when the field's response to your pattern of awareness becomes visible enough on the surface of your experience that you notice it. If this transmission is already shifting something in you, like the video, and subscribe to the channel so these layers keep reaching you when the field has something to say. But there's a layer beneath that, and this is the layer that changes everything about the warning we're building toward. If the field is continuously responding to your pattern of awareness, if the quantum substrate of reality is always reflecting back the frequency of the consciousness that is embedded in it, then the question is not whether you are receiving signs. The question is whether you are in a state of awareness that can perceive the field's response. Whether your pattern of consciousness is coherent enough to recognize the signal within the noise of your surface-level experience. And here is where the ancient traditions enter. Because they mapped this terrain with extraordinary precision, not with the language of quantum mechanics, which didn't exist yet, but with a different vocabulary that describes the same underlying structure of reality. In the Vedic tradition, the concept of Indra's net describes a universe in which every node is connected to every other node by an infinite web of reflective jewels. Each jewel reflects every other jewel. There is no center. There is no periphery. There is only the web and the reflection, and the way that a change in any single node ripples through the entire structure instantaneously. This is not a metaphor for quantum entanglement. It is a map of quantum entanglement drawn by observers who had developed methods of direct perception that could access the structure of reality beneath its surface. In the Hermetic tradition, the principle of correspondence states, as above, so below, as within, so without. This is not a poetic phrase. It is a precise description of the relationship between the state of consciousness and the pattern of external experience. The Hermeticists understood that the visible world is a reflection of the invisible state, that what appears on the surface of your life is a correspondence, a mapping of what exists at the deeper level of your awareness. In the Buddhist tradition, the concept of dependent origination teaches that nothing exists independently. Every phenomenon arises in dependence on conditions. There is no fixed, self-existing thing anywhere in the structure of reality. Everything is a process. Everything is relational. Everything is the arising of pattern from the interaction of conditions, and consciousness is one of those conditions. These traditions were not describing the same thing in poetic terms. They were mapping the same hidden layer of reality that quantum mechanics would later find with instruments. They had developed technologies of awareness, meditation, contemplative practice, direct inquiry into the nature of experience that allowed them to perceive beneath the surface of the visible world and find the quantum substrate that modern physics has now confirmed. And they left something behind that is crucial to what we're building toward. They left a warning, not a dramatic prophecy, not a mystical threat, a precise, practical warning about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to the field of possibility. A warning that has been encoded in different forms across different traditions, but that carries the same essential message. There is a window. There is a threshold. There is a moment when the field's communication becomes so clear, so direct, so unmistakable, that if the consciousness receiving it does not respond, does not shift, does not move, does not collapse the possibility into action, the window closes and the field moves on. What we've uncovered here is the surface of a map that goes far deeper than a single transmission can carry you. If you want the full excavation, all 5 layers charted from the consensus surface down to the original frequency, with practices designed to shift your perception at every depth. That complete territory is mapped in beneath the veil, a quantum map of reality's hidden layers. This video lifts one layer. The book walks you through the descent that most people never complete on their own. You'll find it in the description below. Let me show you what this means at the quantum level. And then let me tell you a story about someone who learned this the hard way. And then let me give you the practice that makes this not just knowledge, but lived experience. At the quantum level, here is what happens when possibility collapses into actuality. The wave function, the mathematical description of all the possible states a quantum system could be in, exists in superposition until an observation occurs. When observation occurs, the wave function collapses. One possibility becomes real. The others don't disappear. They become inaccessible from the branch of reality that has now been determined by the collapse. This is the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, proposed by physicist Hugh Everett in 1957, and now taken seriously by a significant portion of the physics community. In this interpretation, every quantum event, every moment of observation, every collapse of possibility into actuality, branches the universe. All possibilities continue to exist, but in different branches. And the branch you are in is determined by the pattern of observation, the pattern of interaction, the pattern of consciousness that participated in the collapse. Now apply this to the question of signs and the field's communication. Every moment, the quantum field is in a state of superposition with respect to your experience. Multiple possible versions of your next moment exist simultaneously. The version that becomes actual is determined by the intersection of countless factors. But one of those factors, one of the most significant of those factors, is the state of your awareness, the frequency of your consciousness, the coherence of your attention, the pattern of your expectation. When the field sends what you would recognize as a sign, when a pattern appears on the surface of your experience that seems to carry meaning, that seems to be pointing in a direction, that seems to be confirming something you already know at a level deeper than thought. This is not a random event. This is the field's probability distribution collapsing in a way that is coherent with the deeper pattern of your awareness. The sign is not coming from outside you. It is arising from the intersection of your consciousness and the quantum field in which you are embedded. But here is the part that most people never reach. Here is the layer beneath the layer. The collapse is irreversible. Once a quantum event has occurred, once possibility has collapsed into actuality, the branch has been determined. You cannot uncollapse a wave function. You cannot return to the superposition once observation has occurred. The moment has become real, and the possibilities that were not selected have become inaccessible from the branch you are now in. This is the physics of the warning. When the field communicates, when the pattern of your awareness and the quantum substrate of reality align in a way that produces a recognizable signal, that moment of alignment is itself a quantum event. It is a collapse, it is a branch point. And the branch you take from that point, whether you respond to the signal or whether you don't, determines which version of your future becomes accessible. The field does not send the same signal indefinitely. The field is not a patient teacher waiting for you to be ready. The field is a dynamic, responsive, continuously evolving probability distribution, and the pattern that produced the signal you received was a specific configuration of conditions that will not persist indefinitely. It will shift. It will evolve. It will produce a different pattern. And the signal that was coherent with your particular state of awareness at this particular moment will no longer be available. This is not spiritual drama. This is the physics of time, consciousness, and the collapse of possibility. Now let me tell you about Mara. Mara had been standing at the edge of the same decision for 3 years. Not a small decision. The kind of decision that reorganizes everything. The kind of decision that requires you to let go of a version of your life you've been holding on to, not because it's working, but because it's familiar. The kind of decision where you already know the answer, but you keep asking the question, hoping the answer will change. She had received signs, she knew she had. The conversation that happened at exactly the right moment. The book that fell open to exactly the right page. The stranger on the train who said something that landed with the weight of a message she'd been waiting for. The dream that was so vivid, she woke up certain she knew what to do, only to talk herself out of that certainty by noon. She had received signs, and she had done something very specific with them. She had collected them. She had noted them. She had told herself she was gathering confirmation that she was being responsible, that she was waiting for enough evidence before she acted. She had turned the field's communication into data points in a case she was building for a decision she already knew she needed to make. And the signs kept coming for a while, and then something shifted. Not dramatically, not in a way she could point to, but the texture of her days changed. The moments of synchronicity that had been arriving with a kind of breathless frequency began to thin. The dreams became ordinary. The conversations stopped landing with that particular weight. The world continued to move around her, but it stopped speaking to her in the language it had been using. She told herself she was in a quiet period. She told herself the universe was letting her integrate. She told herself the signs would return when she was ready. But here is what had actually happened, and here is the layer beneath what Mara was telling herself. The pattern of her awareness had been in a specific configuration, a specific frequency of readiness, of almost decision, of standing at the threshold, and the field had been responding to that configuration with communications coherent with it. The signs she was receiving were not random. They were the field reflecting back the pattern of her consciousness at that threshold moment. They were the quantum substrate of reality collapsing in ways coherent with her state of standing at the edge of transformation. But consciousness is not static, and the field is not static, and the configuration that had produced those communications, that specific intersection of her awareness and the field's probability distribution, had evolved, not because the field abandoned her, not because she had failed some cosmic test, but because she had remained at the surface of the signal without going to the depth of the response. She had observed the sign without collapsing the wave function of her own life in the direction the sign was pointing, and so her consciousness had drifted, gradually, imperceptibly, the way all patterns drift when they are not moved by decision. The threshold moment had passed, the branch point had been reached and not taken, and the version of her life in which she had responded to the field's communication was now in a different branch, not gone, not impossible, but requiring a different path to reach, requiring a different configuration of conditions, requiring essentially a new beginning rather than a continuation of what had been building. She had to start over, not from nothing. Nothing is ever from nothing, but from a different place. From a place where the momentum that had been building toward that threshold had to be rebuilt, where the field had to be re-engaged from a different angle, where the signs, when they came again, would be different signs pointing toward a different configuration of the same essential truth. The field had moved on, and Mara, eventually, years later, in a different city, in a different life, standing at a different edge, understood what had happened. She understood it not as punishment and not as failure, but as the precise, impersonal operation of the quantum field's relationship with consciousness. The field had communicated. She had received the communication. She had not responded. The pattern had shifted. The window had closed. And she understood something else. Something that is the deepest layer we're going to reach in this transmission. She understood that the warning was not the absence of signs. The warning was the signs themselves. The signs were not confirmation that she could keep waiting. The signs were the field's way of saying, this is the moment. This configuration will not persist. The window is open. The branch point is here. What you do with this moment determines which version of your life becomes real. The sign was the warning. Let me stay with that for a moment. Because this is the layer that most people never reach. Most people receive a sign and interpret it as confirmation that they are on the right path and that they can continue doing what they are doing. They treat the sign as a reward for their awareness, a pat on the back from the universe for paying attention. They receive the signal and feel validated, and then they continue waiting. But the sign is not a reward. The sign is a prompt. It is the field's communication that a specific configuration of possibility is available right now, that the branch point is here, that the window of coherence between your consciousness and this particular potential is open. And the only appropriate response to a sign is not more waiting, it is movement. This is what the ancient traditions understood. This is what is encoded in the stories and teachings and practices that have been passed down across cultures and millennia. The sign is not the destination. The sign is the call to move. In the I Ching, the ancient Chinese system of divination, that is, at its deepest layer, a technology for reading the pattern of the quantum field's current configuration. Every hexagram, every reading, every sign that the oracle delivers contains within it the seed of its own transformation. The I Ching does not tell you what will happen. It tells you what the current pattern is and what movement is coherent with that pattern. And embedded in every reading is the understanding that the pattern is always changing, that the moment you have read is not the moment you will be in when you finish reading, that the oracle is not giving you a fixed truth. It is giving you a window into the current configuration of the field, and the window is always closing. The Taoists called this Wu Wei, the action that is in alignment with the flow of the Tao. Not passive inaction, not aggressive forcing, but the precise, timely, coherent response to the pattern of the moment. Wu Wei is the response to the sign that is so perfectly aligned with the field's current configuration that it feels effortless. It is the action taken at the exact moment when the field is configured to support it. And the Taoists were precise about this. The moment passes, the configuration shifts. What was Wu Wei in one moment becomes forcing in the next. The field moves, and the action that was aligned becomes misaligned, not because the action changed, but because the field did. This is the physics of timing. This is the quantum mechanics of the right moment. And this is why the warning in this transmission is not metaphorical. You have been receiving signs. You know you have. Something in you recognizes this, not as a belief, not as a wish, but as a direct perception of the pattern of your recent experience. The synchronicities, the recurring themes, the conversations that arrived at precisely the right moment, the inner knowing that keeps surfacing and being suppressed and surfacing again, the sense that something is trying to get your attention, that something is pointing in a direction, that something has been building toward a threshold that you can feel but haven't yet crossed. And I want to tell you something about this, directly and without the cushioning of spiritual comfort language. The configuration that is producing these signs is not permanent. The intersection of your consciousness and the field's probability distribution that is generating this particular pattern of communication is a specific, time-limited configuration. It will not persist indefinitely. The field is always moving. Consciousness is always evolving. The pattern that is coherent right now will shift. And when it shifts, the signs that have been arriving in this particular form will stop arriving in this form. Not because you failed, not because the universe withdrew its support, but because the moment will have passed. The branch point will have been reached and not taken, and the next configuration will require a different approach, a different path, a different beginning. This is your final warning, not in the dramatic sense of a threat, in the precise quantum mechanical sense of a field that is communicating a specific configuration of possibility that is available right now, in this window, at this intersection of your consciousness and the infinite potential of what could become real in your life. The warning is not that something terrible will happen if you don't act. The warning is that the window will close, that the pattern will shift, that the branch point will pass, and that the version of your life that is coherent with the signs you've been receiving will become accessible only through a different, longer, more difficult path, if it remains accessible at all. Now let me give you the practice, because this is not just knowledge. This is not just a philosophical understanding of the relationship between consciousness and the quantum field. This is something you can feel right now in the body you are living in the life you are currently experiencing. And the practice is not complicated, it is precise. I want you to do something very specific with the next few minutes. I want you to stop reading the surface of your life and start reading the depth. Here is what I mean. Think of the last 3 signs you received, not the ones you dismissed as coincidence, the ones that landed with weight, the ones that made you pause, even briefly, and feel something that you couldn't quite name but recognized as significant. The conversation, the image, the repeated pattern, the inner knowing that surfaced with unusual clarity, the moment that felt, even for a second, like the field was speaking directly to you. Hold those 3 moments in your awareness, not as memories to analyze, as data about the current configuration of the field, as information about the pattern that your consciousness and the quantum substrate of your reality have been generating together. Now ask yourself, not what they mean, but what they are pointing toward. Not what they say, but what they are asking you to do. Not whether you are ready, but what would happen if you moved right now in the direction they are pointing, with the full weight of your awareness behind that movement. Feel what happens in your body when you ask that question. Not in your mind, in your body. The mind will produce reasons and objections and qualifications. The body is closer to the quantum substrate. The body responds to the field's configuration in a way that bypasses the surface level processing of the analytical mind. The body knows when the window is open. The body knows when the branch point is here. And if you are honest with yourself, if you are willing to go beneath the mind's surface level processing and feel what the body already knows, you will recognize something. And I want to pause here and ask you something directly. What hidden layer have you recently broken through? Was there a truth that was sitting in plain sight until the moment you were finally ready to see it? A pattern in your life that dissolved the instant you looked at it directly, a knowing you'd been carrying beneath the surface that finally surfaced with enough force to change something? Drop it in the comments, not the whole story, just the essence of what you saw when the veil lifted for you. Because the depth this community can reach together is greater than what any single consciousness can reach alone. You have been here before. You have stood at this threshold before. You have felt this particular quality of aliveness, this particular sense of the field's configuration, this particular convergence of signs pointing in the same direction. And you have, at some point, not moved. You have collected the signs and waited for more. You have received the communication and filed it under things to act on when I'm ready. And now you are here again, at a threshold that feels familiar, not because nothing has changed, but because the field has brought you back, because the pattern of your consciousness has re-engaged with a configuration that is coherent with the direction you need to move, because at some level beneath your conscious awareness, you have been circling back toward this moment, and the field is saying, this time, not next time, not when you're more prepared, not when the conditions are more favorable, not when the fear is smaller, or the certainty is larger, or the external confirmation is more overwhelming. This time. Because the configuration is here, because the window is open, because the branch point is now, and the version of your life that is coherent with the signs you've been receiving is accessible from this moment in a way it will not be accessible from the next version of this moment if you let it pass. Let me go deeper into the quantum mechanics of why this matters. Because there is a layer beneath what I've described so far that is, in some ways, the most important layer of this entire transmission. In quantum mechanics, there is a phenomenon called decoherence. Decoherence is the process by which quantum superposition, the state of multiple simultaneous possibilities, breaks down when a quantum system interacts with its environment. In the pristine isolation of a quantum laboratory, a particle can maintain its superposition for measurable periods of time. But in the messy, complex, thermally noisy environment of the real world, quantum superposition collapses almost instantaneously. The interaction of the quantum system with the countless particles and fields of its environment causes the wave function to decohere, to lose its quantum character and behave like a classical, definite, single-outcome system. This is why you don't walk through walls. This is why the table in front of you appears solid and definite rather than a shimmering cloud of probability. The quantum nature of the matter that makes up the table decoheres almost instantaneously in the complex environment of the macroscopic world, and what you interact with is the classical, definite, decoherent outcome of an underlying quantum process. But here is the layer beneath that. Here is what decoherence tells us about signs and windows and the closing of branch points. Consciousness. And here we are at the frontier of physics, in the territory where quantum mechanics and the science of mind have not yet reached a consensus, but where the most interesting thinking is happening. Consciousness may be one of the systems that can maintain quantum coherence in ways that ordinary matter cannot. Some researchers, including physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff, have proposed that quantum processes in the microtubules of neurons may be relevant to the generation of conscious experience. This remains controversial, but the deeper point is not about the specific mechanism. The deeper point is about coherence itself. When your consciousness is in a state of coherence, when your attention is unified, when your intention is clear, when your awareness is not fragmented across multiple competing concerns and anxieties and distractions, you are, in a sense, maintaining a kind of quantum coherence at the level of your experience. Your state of consciousness is one in which the field's probability distribution can produce coherent patterns, in which the signals that the field generates can be received and recognized rather than lost in the noise of a fragmented, decoherent awareness. And when your consciousness is fragmented, when your attention is scattered, when your intention is unclear, when your awareness is buried under layers of distraction and doubt and surface-level processing, you are in a state of decoherence. The field is still generating patterns. The quantum substrate of your reality is still responding to the configuration of your consciousness. But the signals are lost. The patterns are unrecognizable. The signs arrive and are dismissed as coincidence because the receiving system is not coherent enough to recognize the signal within the noise. This is why meditation works, not in the mystical sense of connecting you to something supernatural, in the precise, quantum-adjacent sense of increasing the coherence of your consciousness, reducing the noise, unifying the attention, creating the conditions in which the field's communications become recognizable rather than lost. This is why the ancient traditions placed such emphasis on stillness, on presence, on the cultivation of what the Zen tradition calls beginner's mind, the quality of awareness that is open, receptive, and not already filled with the conclusions of surface-level processing. Beginner's mind is coherent mind. It is the mind that can receive the field's communication because it is not already too full of its own noise to hear the signal. And this is why the warning is urgent. Because the state of coherence that has allowed you to receive the signs you've been receiving, the state of awareness that has made you sensitive to the field's communications, is itself a window. It is itself a configuration that will not persist indefinitely if it is not met with movement. If you remain in the state of receiving without responding, the coherence that made reception possible begins to degrade. The fragmentation of indecision, the noise of perpetual waiting, begins to decohere the very awareness that was capable of hearing the signal. You cannot receive signs indefinitely without responding to them, not because the field stops sending them, but because the act of receiving without responding gradually degrades the coherence of the consciousness that was doing the receiving. The indecision becomes its own kind of decoherence. The waiting becomes its own kind of fragmentation. And eventually, the system that was capable of recognizing the field's communication becomes too noisy, too fragmented, too decoherent to receive it. The warning is not just that the field will stop sending. The warning is that you will stop being able to hear. Now let me take you to the deepest layer, the layer beneath the quantum mechanics and the ancient wisdom and the parable and the practice. The layer that is the core of everything this transmission has been building toward. There is a concept in quantum mechanics called the observer effect, and it has been so thoroughly misrepresented in popular culture that I want to strip away the misrepresentation and show you what is actually beneath it, because what is actually beneath it is more extraordinary than the misrepresentation. The popular version of the observer effect says that consciousness creates reality, that the act of observation collapses the wave function and brings a definite reality into existence from a cloud of possibility. And this is used to support the idea that you can think your desired reality into existence, that your thoughts and beliefs and visualizations directly create the circumstances of your life. This is the surface version, and like all surface versions, it contains a grain of the truth that lies beneath it, but it stops before it reaches the actual depth. Here is what the observer effect actually describes. In quantum mechanics, an observation is not specifically a conscious act. It is any interaction between a quantum system and another system that results in the transfer of information. A photon hitting a detector constitutes an observation. A particle interacting with another particle constitutes an observation. The presence of a measuring instrument constitutes an observation, even if no conscious being looks at the result. The collapse of the wave function does not require consciousness in the narrow sense of a human mind paying attention. But here is where it gets interesting. Here is the layer beneath the layer. The question of what constitutes an observation, what counts as the kind of interaction that collapses a quantum superposition into a definite outcome, is one of the deepest unsolved problems in physics. The Copenhagen interpretation, the dominant framework in quantum mechanics for most of the 20th century, essentially sidesteps this question by defining the boundary between the quantum and classical worlds in a way that is operationally useful but philosophically incomplete. The many worlds interpretation avoids the collapse entirely by saying that all outcomes occur in different branches. Other interpretations, the relational interpretation, the participatory universe of John Archibald Wheeler, the quantum Bayesian interpretation, each address the question differently, but Wheeler's participatory universe is the one that gets closest to the layer we're digging toward. Wheeler, one of the most respected physicists of the 20th century, a colleague of Einstein and Bohr and Feynman, proposed that the universe is not a machine that runs independently of the observers within it. He proposed that it is a participatory phenomenon, that the universe at its most fundamental level requires observers in order to exist as a definite, actualized reality rather than a superposition of possibilities. That the act of observation is not incidental to the universe's existence. It is constitutive of it. Wheeler famously described the universe as a self-excited circuit, a system that brings itself into existence through the act of self-observation, a universe that requires consciousness, not as a passive witness, but as an active participant in the ongoing process of reality's actualization. This is not mysticism. This is John Archibald Wheeler, who coined the term black hole, who developed the concept of quantum foam, who worked on the Manhattan Project and collaborated with Niels Bohr on nuclear fission theory. This is a physicist of the highest caliber proposing, on the basis of careful analysis of quantum mechanics, that the universe is participatory. That consciousness is not a byproduct of the physical universe but a constitutive element of it. And now here is the deepest layer, the layer that the entire structure of this transmission has been built to reach. If the universe is participatory, if reality at its most fundamental level is a process in which consciousness and the quantum field are not separate systems, but aspects of a single self-referential process, then what you call a sign is not the universe speaking to you from outside. It is the universe recognizing itself through you. It is the field's self-referential awareness, the universe's capacity to observe itself, expressing itself through the localized node of consciousness that you are. When you receive a sign, something profound is happening. Something that is not about you receiving a message from an external source. Something that is about the universe's own self-awareness expressing itself through the particular configuration of consciousness that you are. The sign is the field becoming aware of itself through you. The sign is the universe using your consciousness as the instrument of its own self-recognition at this particular location in space and time. And this changes everything about what it means to respond to a sign. When you respond to a sign, when you take the movement that the field's communication is pointing toward, you are not just making a personal choice about your individual life. You are participating in the universe's ongoing process of self-actualization. You are being the instrument through which the field collapses a specific configuration of possibility into reality. You are the observation that makes the potential actual. And when you don't respond, when you receive the sign and wait for more confirmation, when you collect the field's communications without acting on them, when you stand at the branch point and don't take the branch, you are not just missing an opportunity for your personal life. You are leaving a potential unrealized. You are leaving the field's configuration uncollapsed. You are, in the participatory universe, failing to be the observer that this particular moment of reality's self-actualization required. The field moves on, not in anger, not in judgment, but because the universe is always in the process of becoming, always in the process of collapsing possibility into actuality through the observations of the conscious beings embedded within it. And if one node of consciousness fails to collapse a particular potential, the field's probability distribution shifts. The configuration changes. The potential that was available through that particular observer in that particular moment becomes accessible only through a different configuration, if it remains accessible at all. This is the deepest layer of the warning. You are not just a person waiting for the right moment to make a decision. You are a node of the universe's self-awareness at a specific location in the field of all possibility, and the signs you have been receiving are not messages from an external universe to an internal you. They are the universe's own self-recognition, expressing itself through the particular pattern of consciousness that you are, pointing toward a specific configuration of potential that is available through you at this moment in this window. And the window is closing. Not because the universe is impatient, not because you have failed, not because you are not ready, but because the configuration is time limited, because the pattern is always shifting, because the participatory universe is always in the process of becoming, and the becoming requires the participation of the observers within it, and the observers who don't participate at the moment their participation is required are simply no longer part of that particular thread of the universe's self-actualization. The thread continues, but without you in it. Let me bring this back to the surface. Let me bring it back to the texture of your actual life, because I don't want this to remain in the abstract. I don't want this to be something you understand intellectually and file under interesting ideas about quantum mechanics and consciousness. I want this to land in the body. I want this to become a felt sense of the urgency that is appropriate to this moment. Think about what you know, not what you believe. not what you hope, what you know. At the level beneath thought, at the level where the body holds the truth that the mind is still arguing about. What do you know about the direction you need to move? What do you know about the decision you've been circling? What do you know about the version of your life that the signs have been pointing toward? You know something. Something in you knows. It has always known. The signs were not telling you something you didn't know. They were confirming something you already knew at a level deeper than the surface of your conscious awareness. They were the field reflecting back the truth that your own deeper consciousness was already holding. They were the universe showing you, through the pattern of your external experience, what your internal pattern was already pointing toward. And the question, the only question that matters in this moment, is whether you are going to let that knowing collapse into action, or whether you are going to let this moment pass the way the other moments have passed, and begin the longer, harder, more uncertain process of finding your way back to the threshold from a different direction. I want to be honest with you about something. The framing of this transmission, the final warning, the closing window, the urgency of this moment is not designed to frighten you into action. Fear is a surface-level motivator. Fear operates at the level of the ego's survival strategies, and decisions made from fear collapse into a very different version of reality than decisions made from coherent, clear, aligned awareness. The urgency I'm pointing toward is not the urgency of fear. It is the urgency of recognition. The urgency of the person who has been asleep and suddenly realizes they have been dreaming. The urgency of the moment when the veil lifts and you see, with sudden clarity, what has been hidden beneath the surface of your waiting. The urgency is the urgency of clarity. And clarity, in the quantum field, is coherence. And coherence, as we've established, is the condition under which the field's communications can be received and recognized and responded to. So the urgency I'm pointing toward is actually an invitation to more coherence, not less. An invitation to the kind of still, clear, unified awareness from which the right movement arises naturally, not forced, not desperate, but inevitable. The way water moves downhill, the way the wave collapses when observation occurs, the way potential becomes actual when the conditions are right. The conditions are right. This is what the signs have been telling you. Not that you need to force something into existence. Not that you need to struggle against the current of your life, but that the conditions are right, that the configuration is here, that the window is open, that the branch point is now, and that the movement that is coherent with this configuration, the action that is aligned with the field's current pattern, is available to you in a way that it will not be available once the pattern shifts. Wu Wei. The effortless action that is perfectly aligned with the flow of the moment. This is what the signs are pointing toward. Not the effortful, forcing, striving action of someone who is trying to make something happen against the resistance of the field, but the precise, timely, coherent action of someone who has recognized the field's configuration and is moving in alignment with it. The action that feels not like effort, but like inevitability, like the last piece of a structure clicking into place, like the wave finally reaching the shore. Let me tell you about one more thing before we reach the integration. One more layer that I want to peel back, because it is the layer that answers the question you might be asking right now. The question is, how do I know the difference between a sign that is calling me to action and a sign that is simply confirming I'm on the right path? How do I know the difference between the field's communication that a window is open and the field's communication that I'm moving in the right direction? How do I know when the sign is a warning and when it is a validation? Here is the layer beneath that question. The distinction you're drawing between a sign that calls to action and a sign that validates current action is a surface-level distinction that dissolves when you go deeper, because at the level of the quantum field, there is no difference between a call to action and a validation of current action. There is only the field's current configuration. There is only the pattern of what is coherent right now. And if you are moving in alignment with that pattern, the signs you receive are both validation and continuation. They are the field confirming that your movement is coherent and pointing toward the next step of that movement. And if you are not moving, if you are waiting, if you are standing at the threshold without crossing it, then the signs you receive are not validation of your waiting. They are the field's communication that the configuration is here and the movement is needed. In other words, the sign that arrives when you are already in motion is different in quality from the sign that arrives when you are standing still. Not because the field sends different kinds of signs, but because the consciousness that is receiving the sign is in a different state. The coherent, moving, aligned consciousness receives the field's communication as confirmation and direction. The fragmented, waiting, threshold-standing consciousness receives the same field's communication as evidence that it should keep waiting. The sign is the same. The consciousness receiving it is different, and the consciousness receiving it determines what it means. This is why the practice of coherence, the cultivation of unified, clear, present awareness, is not optional. It is not a nice addition to the work of reading signs and responding to the field. It is the prerequisite. It is the condition under which the field's communication can be accurately received and appropriately responded to. Without coherence, the sign is received through the filter of the waiting consciousness and interpreted as permission to keep waiting. With coherence, the same sign is received through the clarity of aligned awareness and recognized as the call to movement that it is. So here is the practice I want to leave you with. Not as a technique to try and then forget, as a way of being that you can cultivate from this moment forward that will change the quality of your relationship with the field's communications, that will make you the kind of consciousness that can receive the field's signs accurately and respond to them in the way that keeps the windows open and the branch points available. The practice is this. Before you interpret any sign, before you analyze any synchronicity, before you decide what any communication from the field means, stop. Drop beneath the mind's surface level processing. Feel the body. Find the place in the body where the truth is held before the mind has a chance to argue with it. And from that place, from the body's direct knowing, from the coherent awareness beneath the noise of thought, ask not what the sign means, but what it is asking you to do. Not what it means, what it is asking you to do. Because the field does not send signs to give you information about the nature of reality. The field sends signs to prompt movement, to indicate configuration, to communicate that a specific potential is available and that the observation, the participation, that will collapse it into actuality is needed now. The sign is always, at its deepest layer, a call to action. The question is only what action, and whether you are coherent enough to hear the answer clearly. And when you hear the answer, when the body's knowing surfaces clearly through the coherent awareness beneath the mind's noise, the response is not analysis. It is not more waiting for confirmation. It is not the collection of additional evidence. It is movement, precise, aligned, coherent movement in the direction the field is pointing. The collapse of the wave function of your own life in the direction of the potential that the field has been communicating. This is what it means to live in relationship with the quantum field. Not to observe it from a distance, not to wait for it to do something for you, but to be the participant in the participatory universe that Wheeler described. To be the observer whose observation is what makes the potential actual. To be the node of the universe's self-awareness through which this particular thread of reality's becoming is woven. Now let me bring this to the community. Because this transmission is not just for you, it is for everyone who is standing at a threshold right now. Everyone who has been receiving signs and waiting for the right moment to respond. Everyone who has felt the field's configuration and recognized it as significant, and then looked for more confirmation rather than moving in the direction it was pointing. If you are in that place, if you are standing at the edge of something you know you need to do, holding a knowing that keeps surfacing and being suppressed, feeling the weight of a decision you've been circling, I want you to do something right now. In the comments below this transmission, I want you to write one word, not the explanation, not the context, not the story of why you've been waiting. One word that describes the direction the signs have been pointing. One word that names the movement the field has been calling you toward. One word. Because naming it, even in a single word, is itself a collapse. It is itself a movement. It is the first small observation that begins to collapse the wave function of your own life in the direction of the potential that has been waiting for your participation. One word. And then notice what happens in the body when you write it. Notice whether something shifts. Notice whether the coherence that has been fragmented by the indecision of waiting begins to consolidate around that single named direction. Notice whether the field responds to your movement, however small, with a recognition that feels like confirmation, because it will. The field always responds to coherent movement. That is the nature of the participatory universe. The observer who begins to observe is always met by the field's response to that observation. And for those of you who have already moved, who have already crossed a threshold that you had been standing at, who have already responded to a sign that was calling you to action rather than waiting for more confirmation, I want to hear from you too, because your experience is the evidence. Your experience is the data point that the quantum field's participatory nature is not a theory, but a lived reality. Tell us what happened when you moved. Tell us what the field did in response to your observation. Tell us what became real that had been possibility. Because this is how the community of depth seekers is built. Not by everyone agreeing on a belief system, but by everyone sharing the direct experience of the field's response to coherent, aligned, timely movement. By everyone adding their data point to the collective understanding of what happens when consciousness participates in the participatory universe, rather than waiting on the sidelines. Now let me give you the integration principle. The single understanding that ties together every layer we've excavated in this transmission and gives you something to carry forward into the texture of your actual life. The integration principle is this. The sign is not the message. The sign is the moment. The sign is not a message that contains information you need to process and analyze and integrate before you can act. The sign is a moment, a specific configuration of the field, a specific window of coherent potential, a specific branch point at which the version of reality that is coherent with your deepest knowing is accessible. And the only appropriate response to a moment is to be in it, fully, coherently, with the whole of your awareness present and the whole of your willingness available. The sign is the moment. And the moment is now, not the moment of some future decision, when you've gathered enough evidence or reduced enough fear or achieved enough certainty. The moment is now. The configuration is here. The window is open. The branch point is present. And the movement that is coherent with this moment, the collapse of the wave function of your life, in the direction the field has been pointing, is available to you right now in a way it will not be available once this moment has passed. This is not urgency as pressure. This is urgency as recognition. The recognition that the present moment is always the only moment in which potential can become actual, that the future is always made from the present, that the branch points of your life are always here, in the moment you are in, and that the version of your future that is coherent with the deepest truth of who you are is always most accessible from the most coherent, most present, most aligned version of the moment you are currently in. You have been waiting for the right moment. This is the right moment. Not because of anything special about this particular day or this particular transmission, but because the right moment is always the present moment for the consciousness that is fully in it. And the signs you've been receiving, the field's communications that have been arriving with increasing frequency and clarity, have been pointing toward this. The recognition that the waiting is over, that the configuration is here, that the window is open, that the movement is available. And now you know something you didn't know when you arrived here. You know not just that there are signs, but what a sign actually is at the level of the quantum field. You know not just that the field communicates, but how it communicates, and what the communication is actually asking for. You know not just that windows close, but why they close, and what the closing means at the level of the participatory universe. You know not just that you've been waiting, but what the waiting has been costing, not in punishment, but in the gradual degradation of the coherence that makes reception possible. What has been revealed cannot be re-hidden. You are no longer a surface dweller looking for signs on the surface of your life. You have seen the layer beneath the sign. You have seen the layer beneath that. In the layer, you have reached the deepest layer, the participatory universe, the self-referential field, the universe using your consciousness as the instrument of its own self-actualization. And you cannot unsee it. The veil is thinner than you thought, and now you can see through it. But seeing through the veil is not the destination. Seeing through the veil is the beginning of the participation that the participatory universe has always been waiting for from you. The beginning of the movement that the field's configuration has been pointing toward. The beginning of the version of your life that has been available in potential and waiting for your observation to collapse it into actual. The field does not wait forever, but it is waiting now. Right now, in this moment, in this configuration, with this window open and this branch point available, the field is waiting for the observation that will make the potential real. You are the observer. The observation is yours to make. And after this particular transmission, after this particular configuration of the field's communication has reached you in this particular form, there will not be another sign quite like this one. Not because the field stops communicating, but because this configuration, this specific intersection of your consciousness and the field's probability distribution that produced this particular pattern of recognition will have shifted. The next configuration will be different. The next signs will point from a different angle. The next window will open onto a different view of the same essential truth. This is the final warning, not because it is the last thing the field will ever say to you. It is the final warning because it is the last time this particular configuration will say this particular thing. The field has been building toward this moment in the pattern of your recent experience, and this transmission is the apex of that pattern and what you do with this moment. How you respond to this particular configuration of the field's communication will determine which version of your future becomes accessible from here. The window is open. The branch point is now. The observer is you. And the potential that has been waiting, the version of your life that is coherent with the deepest truth of who you are and what you are here to do, is more real than anything on the surface of the life you've been living while you waited for the right moment. This is the right moment. If this transmission reached a layer in you that you know someone else is ready to touch, send it to them. Not as a recommendation, as an act of participation, because lifting the veil for someone else strengthens the coherence of the field you both inhabit, and two consciousness fields that have broken through the same surface together can hold a depth that neither could sustain alone. And if you felt something shift during this transmission, return to it in a quiet morning hour or in the stillness before sleep, when the surface noise is lowest and the deeper layers are most accessible. A second pass through this material lands differently once the first layer has already moved. Welcome to what was always beneath everything. Welcome to the layer where the waiting ends and the becoming begins. The veil has lifted. And what you see now, you will carry with you into every moment that follows. Every sign you receive, every window you recognize, every branch point you stand at. You will carry the knowledge of what a sign actually is. You will carry the understanding of what the field is actually doing when it communicates. You will carry the recognition that the universe is participatory and that you are a participant, and that your participation, your coherent, aligned, timely observation, is what makes the potential actual. You are not a surface dweller anymore. You see the depth, now move toward it. Move